Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the Pew Review. I'm your host, Matt Jarrett. I'm the worship director here at Whiting Christian Church, alongside the one and only amazing Jed Shermer, who's our lead minister here at the church. And again, welcome. We just got done with an amazing Easter weekend.
Yep.
And quick recap, we had a baptism, and it was a wonderful thing to be a part of. And we also have some additional questions coming up. We finished up on the series Standing on the Promises.
Yep.
We have some additional questions that we're going to do as part of our podcast today. So, Jed, are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's have some fun this morning. Okay, so our first question comes from Matthew chapter 5. And the question says, what does it mean, Jed, to be poor in spirit?
Perfect. Let's dive into that. So, chapter 5 in Matthew begins Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, one of the most famous teachings that Jesus ever gave, the longest continuous teaching that we have of Jesus. And it begins with a section that we often call the Beatitudes. And so the very first section of that, verse 3, we get that verse. It says, "Blessed are the poor in the spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs." And then it continues on with it's a whole section of blessedness. Blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the humble, blessed are those who hunger and thirst, blessed are the merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, and those who are persecuted because of righteousness. And so when we look at poor in spirit, one of the first things that we have to do is remove a cultural thing that's been ingrained in a lot of our lives, just again because of our culture, and that's this idea that poor is good and rich is bad. Just to break that down simply, it's very pervasive in our culture today, that poor people are good people, rich people are bad people. And so we take that and then we read, blessed are the poor in spirit, and so yes, this is Jesus affirming that idea. And a lot of times when we take the difficulties that the Bible speaks of when it comes to rich people, like the rich young ruler who came and wanted to be able to inherit the kingdom of earth, and Jesus asks him, "Hey, have you followed these different things?" And he's like, "Yeah." And Jesus is like, "Sweet, go give away your possessions." And the guy walked away sad because he had great possessions. And we're like, yes, Jesus is against being rich. We shouldn't be rich. Nobody should be rich. We should all be poor, and that makes us good people.
Yeah.
And it's just not true.
Right.
That's not a biblical precedent, and we're going to talk about why and what more the Bible is getting at, because that's going to help us understand poor in spirit. And so the dichotomy between rich and poor biblically is about dependence. That's the ultimate thing that it's about. It's about dependence. And so our relationship with God is greatly impacted by our recognition of our dependence on Him. And so for rich people, it's harder. This is why you get the famous verse of it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom, to get into heaven. And it's not because they have wealth, it's because of their self-reliance and their self-dependence. They lack in an ability to trust in God because their lives are so taken care of through their wealth in life.
Okay.
And so when the Bible talks about this issue between rich and poor, it's not one is good, one is bad. It's poor people have such an easier time understanding dependence on something else. They're going to have such an easier time understanding dependence on God because they come to God all the time, just as Jesus talks about in how to pray. They come to God for their daily bread, right? God, I want to eat today. I need your help to help me. Let me eat today, Lord, please. And they have this dependence on God that makes that relationship with Him easier because they understand dependence. And so rich people have a harder time understanding dependence, and that's why that's going to help us understand blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, to understand what he's talking about with poor in spirit, let's just flip it on its head and ask the question, well, who are the rich in spirit?
Yeah.
Like
Like who would have been considered rich in that in spirit
yeah.
in that day and age?
Yeah. And that becomes clear in reading the Gospels and reading Jesus' interactions with people who would have called themselves rich in spirit.
Probably Pharisees, I would imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were the people that, again, the idea of spirit for them, being rich in spirit, was self-righteousness. It was, look what I have done spiritually. Look who I am spiritually. And so it was all about their own self-righteousness and self-reliance.
Boasting about it.
Yeah. Which was the complete opposite of what the law was supposed to be, right? Because the law is supposed to show us our dependence on God. We can't do anything without Him because we can't uphold the law. We can't be actual self-righteous people.
Right.
And so the Sermon on the Mount is famous for flipping things on its head, and this is why Jesus so frequently in these different sections throughout the chapters of the Sermon on the Mount, well, you've heard it said, but I will tell you.
Okay.
And so he's flipping the narrative of what the Pharisees have been telling and what they've been teaching and getting people's understanding of spiritualness and dragging, no. You're not going to make it far being self-reliant and self-righteous. Rather, those who are poor in spirit, which means not, I think one of the confusing things with this is does it mean poor in faith? And it's not talking about poor in faith.
Okay.
It's saying spiritually, I can do nothing without God. Those are the poor in spirit.
And it reinforces the idea of grace.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the big thing with poor in spirit is it's not about a lack of faith. It's saying those who understand their reliance and dependence on God spiritually. And those are the ones who literally the kingdom of heaven is theirs, right? Nobody who is rich in spirit will enter the kingdom of God because we're not going to make it on our own self-reliance or our own self-righteousness.
Now, if I could ask a follow-up question with that. So I hear a lot in like Christian circles, and there's different denominations and sects that it seems to be like there's a little bit of like, did the Pharisees have an emphasis on works-based from that in that day? Was there anything scripturally that you found or anything contextually that when you did your prep that sort of had this leaning? Did any of the other, like for example, 600 something laws in the Old Testament pertain to the opposite side of that spectrum, why they believed that so thoroughly, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I think the main thing with the Pharisees is they missed, and what we see again out of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is, he talks about, in verse 21 of chapter 5, you've heard that it was said, our ancestors do not murder. And whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, whoever is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. Whoever says you fool will be subject to hellfire. And so he gets, right, they took it so literally.
Yeah.
They took the law so literally that they failed to grasp a relationship with God and the heart of God in the law, right?
Okay.
It's not just I'm going to push up to the point of murder, right, and then be fine. It's what is going on in our heart that leads someone to murder that we need to be careful of and flee from, all of temptation and all of that. And so they took the law so literally, and this is why they struggled with self-righteousness, because they made it easier on themselves by taking it so literally. And that's, and we do this all the time,
Like the how far is too far argument.
Yeah, exactly. And I even, Sammy and I, were talking about this the other day, kids are amazing at loopholes with rules
And button pushing.
right. Yes. Well, they're going to take, when you as a parent say something, they take it as literally as possible. And then when they go and you're like, what are you doing? I told you not to do that. Well, no. You said, they're like lawyers.
Yeah.
They're like, no.
Yeah.
This is how you worded it. And it's like, okay, but you have to understand the heart of what I am saying, not just the words that I'm saying, the heart of what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what the Pharisees missed. And so, and this is, to give further example of this, of poor in spirit. And, I talked about how financially poor people have an easier time understanding dependence. Think of it like this. Those of us who grew up in the church,
Yep.
we have a harder time in relationship with God and dependence on God spiritually than someone who has a horrific testimony of abuse and difficulty in their life. Because they understand what rock bottom feels like.
Yep.
They understand what it is to have nowhere to go but to depend on God. And because of that, they have a natural reliance and on Him, and it boosts their relationship with Him. And so, now, does that mean that us who grew up in the church, well, we shouldn't grow up in the church, we should just push people into horrible situations so they can learn dependence on God? Well, no. That just means for those of us who did grow up in the church, we have some extra work to do to understand dependence. And I think that comes with, understanding the pervasiveness and the seriousness of sin. When we understand that, it brings us to a point of being poor in spirit. God, I am not the murderer on death row. I am not the person who stole millions from someone, but I am a sinner, and that deserves death. And so I need you, Lord. And so there's some extra work that we have to do to reach that, to understand how poor in spirit we are.
To understand that mentality.
Yeah. But it's necessary to understand our dependence in our relationship with God. And so that's what blessed are the poor in spirit is talking about, because it's getting at self-righteousness is not the answer. Dependence on God is the answer.
That's so good. That's so good. So let's go ahead and see if we can move on to our next question. This is more of an experience question, I guess we could say. And the question reads, what blessings or challenges have you had having a young family in today's culture? Like, what are some blessings and challenges that young families can expect to face as they're entering that season of life?
Yeah. Let's start with the blessings. And I'll go through this fairly quickly. This isn't anecdotal evidence of my own life. This is research backed by places like the Pew Center, which is not our research. We were doing the Pew review, and the Pew research, is widely acclaimed, and they do a lot of research on that front. Active Christian families, and I preface active. And so what I mean by active is, yes, active on Sunday mornings, active in participating in the church, but also families that pray together, that do devotions together, that read the Bible together. That's what, that serve together. Active Christian families, research has shown, are happier. They experience, those homes have less instances of abuse. Those are the families that are the most active in helping in communities. They show, and then those kids grow up to be active parts of helping in the community that continues on. And overall, the marriages in those families are better. And so those are just, again, not anecdotal. This is research-backed evidence showing that active Christian families are some of the happiest in the world.
And I believe they have a website, and what we can do is we can include that. I think it's pewresearch.org, and if we'll include that in the show notes and the show description below. If you're watching on YouTube, or in the descriptions on Apple and Spotify, we can definitely include those links. We'll do some additional looking into that too. So.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. Now, in anecdotal evidence, I would say in Sammy and I's own life, that being active Christians has brought about the most blessings. And we understand the importance and the blessing of our marriage and our relationship with one another. We understand the blessing that each child brings to our life and the joy that they bring. We find great joy in serving together. We find great joy in being together. And so I do think that there's a lot of blessing for young Christian families that are active in their faith together. And so now I wanted to get through that quick because the challenges are a lot.
I believe that, yeah.
The challenges for young Christian families today are a lot. And so, there's trying to give your kids a good value system in a world that's trying to do the opposite.
And then just to preface, this is all evidence-based too, from the same source, the Pew Research?
No, this is more my experience in ministry.
Sure, okay.
This is more my experience in ministry, just looking at the world and observing what's going on. And so, but yes, trying to give your kids a good value system in a world that's not. And the world is pushing its own value system, while as Christians, we kind of stand apart, wholly separate from that, trying to help our kids in the best way possible, and that's getting harder and harder. It's even in the post-COVID, that is rampantly getting harder. Another thing, the last. Well, I mean, just since we broke the millennia, technology has boomed, and we're in the early stages of research on how technology impacts people, and especially kids.
Sure.
And so families are wrestling with, how much technology is too much technology. How do we protect our kids while they're on technology? And that gets into sub things of, the pornography epidemic that the world is facing, sex trafficking via, you don't have white vans driving around with candy anymore.
Yep.
People are attacking your kids through technology, through the internet, through games, and it's mind-boggling to hear the stories, to hear the statistics on all of that happening. Westwood had some people come in that showed a newer movie talking about sex trafficking in Iowa specifically.
Oh, really?
And I had several parents that were able to go and attend and just talked about how, again, it just opened their minds to how serious of an issue this is.
Well, it makes sense because, I mean, we're close to, major interstates going both north and south and east and west.
Yep.
So that does, I mean, I can totally see that.
And then it's not even, I don't want to just get onto the subject of sex trafficking, but they don't even have to kidnap you per se anymore. Through blackmailing and the use of acquiring different things from you via the internet. It's horrendous thing. There's a challenge that families are facing right now is how do we keep our kids safe when the internet is everywhere, right?
And to your point, I mean, I've even heard of some states looking at enacting legislation to change the minimum required age for certain social media accounts and different things like Facebook and Instagram.
Yes. All those social medias.
Or like a teen version or something.
And again, like the gaming world is a huge target for those people. Games that you wouldn't, there's obvious games. Grand Theft Auto is a hub for that type of stuff, which the game's called Grand Theft Auto. I don't know how that's not an obvious hub for that type of stuff. But kids-based games, Roblox, is a huge one at the top of the list for games that are being used to get access to children. And so it's a horrible thing that families are having to deal with and trying to wrestle with. And, Sammy and I wrestle with that all the time of, how much technology, when do we allow them access to different things of technology, and I look back, I mean, cell phones were popular when we were in high school and whatnot, and I didn't get my first one until I was 18, and I fought that tooth and nail, and so I wanted one sooner, and And now I look back and I'm like, I don't ever want to give my kids
Yeah.
one. And so, and there's difficulty there. Some other challenges for families. Again, I don't want to make it super negative for families or point people away from having families, but this is just the reality. Schedules are getting tighter.
I hear you on that one.
I'll talk about sports in a second, but families just overall, their schedules are getting much tighter, and families need margin in life. They need time to be able to sit around a table and have a meal. They need the time to just, I mean, how can we expect them to be active in their faith, in their home, if they're never together in their home, right? How are they going to do devotions? How are they going to have time in prayer together if they're constantly running in different directions 24/7? And so the schedules are getting tighter, and there's just no margin in life, and no time to just be. And that's a huge danger, and that's a huge challenge for families of finding that balance. Margin is not designed to be all-encompassing in life, right? It's supposed to be the little bit of extra that we get on the sides. And so I'm not saying cut everything out,
Right.
but if we don't have that little bit of space where we can enjoy some meals together during the week, where we can sit down and talk with one another during the week, maybe have some prayer, some devotion, whatever, that's an issue. That's preventing us from being active in our faith, and we're going to lose those blessings that we have from being active in our faith if we can't do it. And so that's another challenge. And then, yes, a big part of this is sports. And I really wrestled with if I wanted to bring up sports in the podcast, because there's a natural fear, because of how popular sports are, is you don't want to push people away, because you know, they hear you talk negatively about sports and they're like, man, and they shut off, gone. And maybe we lost some people already, I don't know. But I also question, how long do you let something be an issue before you call it an issue?
Sure.
And this is coming, I didn't grow up in a huge sports family. You know, my parents didn't do a ton of sports. I loved sports. I did basketball, cross country, and some other things. I did baseball for a while, and so I liked sports. But again, since, you know, before COVID, sports were ramping up and they were kind of eating away at everybody's life.
Yep.
And then I was really hoping during COVID and during shutdown, when everything, you know, families were finding more of that margin blessing of just time together, that would be a wake-up call. And I guess not.
Yeah.
It's gotten so much worse
Floodgates opened
since 2020, and to the point of, you know, the travel teams, the amount of money and time that families are spending on the travel stuff is mind-blowing. The fact that I've talked with people in the school system, that school sports are under threat of collapsing because of travel ball.
Really?
Yeah.
Even in remote Northwest Iowa?
Yeah.
Wow.
That if the travel ball stuff doesn't get checked at some point, that school sports could fall apart, because the kids are rather than doing the typical season, they go off and they do the travel stuff, and
that's insane.
And so, which again is just, not even speaking to that as good or bad. It's just mind blowing to hear people talk about that.
The culture change.
Yes.
I mean, like, we're not even that far out of high school ourselves. I mean, you know, what, 20 years?
Oh, and high school sports were everything.
Yeah, in high school. Yeah, I mean, it was like a borderline cultish. I mean,
Sure.
in some instances, and you know, even just reflecting on my own high school experience. Granted, you know, in smaller schools, you have to go out for certain things, or else
you don't have it.
You don't have it, or
Exactly.
you know, programs get cut.
Yep.
And so when I was growing up, you know, I mean, you know, small town Nebraska for you, small town Iowa for me and my brother, but I mean, we would go out for, you know, it was not strange to have a day that starts, you know, at the school at 6:30, 7 in the morning before classes even start, because we were doing band rehearsals or jazz band, or we were doing pep band for Friday night stuff, and then you'd have students play in the pep band for the girls game, and then they would switch for they would suit up for their own game later afterwards, and it's just to follow, and you just have this huge sequence of events that all happen just vying for distractions. And the thing that I was grateful for was that, because I was more of a musician guy growing up, granted, I would play with the same guys for band stuff, whether it be jazz band, concert band, marching band, and then that would all translate into stuff here at the church. And so, and that was nice. You didn't have to worry about rehearsing quite so much for one versus the other, because you knew that you were working with a great team to cover everything. But I don't really see that in this day and age.
No, and I just want to be clear. I'm not advocating that we get rid of sports. Again, I like sports.
Or any activities. You've got dance, you've got speech,
any of those,
you've got
yeah. I'm not advocating we get rid of these things. I'm saying just the age-old truth of too much of anything is bad. And so we have to be careful not to push our kids too much, that we don't take away from their childhood. Because we want to push them in sports so hard. And so I think even just the research is early in how much toll this takes on a child being pushed into activities, or being allowed to do so much activities, because it's not just parents pushing them in it, but there are kids who love it and want to do it all the time. And but as parents, we have to wrestle with what is the healthiest and best for my child. And I think there's some challenges in the sports area for parents to wrestle with and figure out.
So let me ask you a follow-up question with what you have seen in your personal experience, and with what you have seen sort of with ministry and stuff across the board. Have you noticed a trend, or seen any sort of trend where there's because people are worried about being competitive in sports, or is it because people want to be competitive in sports because they're looking towards trying to get a college scholarship, or if they're trying to, do you actively have students who are trying to get into the big leagues?
Why is it such a pervasive issue? Why are we pushing so hard?
Yeah, have you noticed any trends amongst research or parents or anything, just with it just seems to be everything is getting just more competitive in general.
Yes, yeah.
But I just wasn't sure if you noticed a trend one way or the other.
Yeah, I haven't read any research or anything, so I can't answer from that front. So take anything I say with a grain of salt. Back in my younger years, the kids who were pushed super hard in sports came from parents who either wanted to relive their glory days of doing sports, or had some sort of shortcoming that they didn't make it to the level that they wanted to, and they wanted to push their kids to be able to push past that. And we've all met, the parents who are trying to live through their kids in that. I think that's still a thing today. I don't think it's maybe as bad. I think there's more to it than that today in our culture. And I think if I was to spitball, I would think part of it is coming back to some of the school stuff. It's the age-old issue of popularity. It's kids want to fit in, parents want to fit in. That doesn't end.
So like a cliquey sort of
to a degree, and I think it's also with parents is the fear of my kid missing out. All these other parents are pushing their kids into these travel teams, into doing these to get better. And is my kid going to miss out because they're not participating in it, because they're not going to get the play time on some of their teams, because they don't have the experience and the skill that some of these other kids who are just doing this nonstop have? And so I think there's a broad spectrum of things going on in that arena that we have to deal with and look at and evaluate. And so as parents, you have to be able to take a step back and say, why? What benefit is this doing my child, and what negative consequences are going to come out of is my child missing out on key aspects of childhood because of this? Is there, I mean, even from a medical standpoint of, young bodies can only take so much.
That's right.
And you're going to cause lifelong issues for something that might last maybe through college years. And so there's a lot of stuff we could talk about with sports. And I want to keep going just for the sake of time.
For the sake of time. We might have follow-up questions with that, though, too.
I just want to round out talking with this question about what the church can do.
Sure. I think it's a great way
in regard to young families.
Yeah.
First and always, pray first.
Yeah.
Pray for them. Pray for young families. I mean, if you are a young family, pray for yourself. Pray for the other young families that you know, because it is hard. There's a lot of challenges right now, and so be praying for them. Check in on young families. And push past the niceties. It's easy to, hey, how are you guys doing? Oh, we're doing good. And then you go back, no. Well, how are you guys really doing? Like, what's going on in parenting? How are the kids doing? Are they in school? How's school going? Find out in that, maybe there's some ways that you can help once you push past the niceties. Hey, can I just bring you a meal?
Yeah.
Man, we've had so many people in the church do that for us, and it is the biggest blessing in the world to have someone to bring a meal and just not to have to worry about cooking for one time. Like, it's huge.
Well, and I mean, I'm gonna just brag on our church. I mean, the women in this church, they know how to potluck.
Yeah.
They know how to cook, and I can even remember just the community support we had when we had our second child. We had a woman bring over a lasagna, and it was just like, I hadn't had lasagna honestly in like a year or two.
Sure,
and just it brought back so many it was so good. And don't underestimate the power of a good meal.
Other things, offer babysitting. Babysitting can be really hard to find, especially for Christian families who are very conscious of who is watching their children.
Yep.
We need good, strong Christians to offer babysitting for young families. And I don't want this to come off as Matt and Jed as young dads to be like, please come babysit. No, I'm not saying that. Go babysit other children other than mine. That's fine. I just know that that's a huge blessing for families, for a husband and wife to be able to get off to go spend some time out on a date.
Yeah.
And to invest in their marriage. It is a huge blessing for young families. And then the other biggest thing is just encouragement.
Yep.
You can get so lost in the trenches of when you have toddlers running around and you're losing your mind, and then you have people talking about, the issues of technology and sports, and it's just overwhelming. And so, parents need to understand and hear you're doing good. Keep working. Maybe offer some passages. I can't remember the book. The passage that don't fall weary of doing good. Keep up the fight. Keep running the race. All the cliches. I don't know.
Yeah.
Offer encouragement to these young families because they need it. They need it. Some other things that the church can do is partner with them. And what I mean by that is, in the sports conversation, one family going to a coach and saying, this is too much, is not enough. The coach isn't going to care. Young families should partner together. They should have other people that partner together to address these issues. We need to do this together. And so partnering with families and whatever that looks like, and trying to help in some of those can relieve some of the challenges that families face.
Absolutely.
And the last thing as a whole for big church, like across the world church, is we need to be continually offering resources for young families.
Yeah.
Marriage conferences, books, articles, podcasts. One that I'd like to point young families to is a ministry called Focus on the Family. They have book resources, again, articles, podcasts. They do marriage conferences. They have so many different resources. FocusOnTheFamily.com. Go check it out if you're a young family looking for some help. It's a great resource. They have tons of stuff to look at. And so But yeah, be praying for young families.
That's a great way to close that question out. So we're going to move on to our final question this morning, and it kind of goes back a little bit more into the sports arena. But what does the Bible say about blood sports like UFC and other contact sports like football, hockey? Are they good? Are they not good? Because I mean, I guess they're talking about using. They want to use their bodies as a temple for the Lord, and you see these athletes who are, giving glory to God after a victory, different things like that. So, does the Bible have anything to say about those?
Not specifically, and so I think this question is a great opportunity when the Bible does. There's nothing in the Bible that says, "Thou shalt not box," right? And so when the Bible doesn't speak specifically about a topic, we need to understand that doesn't mean that the Bible has nothing to offer.
Thou shalt not armbar an opponent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're both, 90s kids who grew up with Power Rangers.
Yeah.
And Jason David Frank, who was the green, white, black, red.
Yeah, he did
all
so
the different
many
colors.
seasons. Yeah.
I always loved. He went into MMA for a little bit.
Yeah, didn't he do Muay Thai or something like that?
Yeah, and so he had a line of fighting gear called Jesus Didn't Tap.
I never knew that.
Yeah, and so I always loved that. But so no, just because the Bible doesn't have a specific verse in this doesn't mean that we can't draw biblical principles to understand a topic like this.
Sure.
Now, the overall issue with this question, not with the question itself, but the broader topic above the question is the topic of violence and pacifism and things of that nature. And the Bible has a lot to say on those topics. Now, a simple definition of violence, because that's what we're dealing with, is acts with the intent to physically harm. Right? That's what we would. I think that's just the easiest way to understand violence is acts with an intent to physically harm. Now, just with that simple definition means that we can rule out issues with many contact sports because football, basketball, wrestling, hockey, rugby, lacrosse, they're all contact sports.
With the goal of winning a game, but not to cause...
Scoring points, yes. There's the point of the game is not to cause physical harm. The point of the game is not violence. And so biblically, I think there's nothing wrong with those contact sports. Now, it's a different conversation of talking about how any contact sport can be a breeding ground for anger that lashes out in violence. And we've seen this. I mean, we did sports. We all watch sports for the most part.
You've seen clearing of the benches for several MLB games. And
yes, clearing of the benches. You get...
you had USA versus Canada, for
The
hockey.
whole first part of the game was just a fist fight.
Yeah.
And so that's a different question. I don't, now can you have those contact sports without that? Yeah, I think so. But, being careful of something is not the same of, well, we shouldn't do it. Now, there's also another part with those of, right now we're dealing with morality. We're dealing with, is this good or bad? I think there's another aspect to consider with contact sports. Is this wise?
Oh, sure.
There's more and more studies coming out in regard to brain injuries in regards to football and other contact sports.
With concussions
and stuff. And so as you talked about, our bodies being a temple, and is it wise for our body to put them through such a beating is another thing to consider. I'm not going to make that decision for anybody, but something to consider. Now, on the other end of that are boxing and martial arts, in which a number of the competitive aspects of those is the whole premise is I'm going to try and hurt you more than you hurt me. And so that's where we have to look a little bit more at violence in the Bible and what it has to say in regard to something of that. Now, in our fallen world we live in, violence is inevitable and sometimes necessary. And there's going to be people that I think disagree with me on that. But I think biblically, we see so many instances of necessary violence because of the state of our fallen world.
Sure.
The flood was a very violent act.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was not just the rainbow.
And it was necessary violence.
Certainly.
Um,
You think of Sodom and Gomorrah.
and Gomorrah.
You think of David being assisted by the Lord with so many different military campaigns.
You can think the end times are going to be violent. The Bible makes that very clear. And not all violence is bad in the sense that we don't want violence, but necessary violence in the sense of we're getting rid of evil. And I think of Israel and the battles that they faced to wipe out nations to clear evil in the world.
Right.
Necessary violence. David was praised as a warrior because of the violence that he had participated in. So in my opinion, not all violence that exists in the current state of our world is bad, is wrong. And I think some of it is necessary. I think there's a level of some necessary violence, and I think some examples of this could be self-defense. I am a Christian who believes in self-defense. I think there's a difference between being a victim and being a martyr. If someone wants to kill me because of my faith, that's one thing. If someone just wants to rob my home and hurt my family, that's different. And I will defend myself and my family violently if necessary. Capital punishment. I won't go into that full topic, but
we might have another question.
We might have another question, but capital punishment is another. And then another big can of worms that we could open, we won't go full into, again, is war. The necessity of war at times and the necessity of violence in war. And so those are different things in which, in the current state of our world, as a fallen, sinful world, where violence might be necessary. Now, many of boxing, martial arts, a lot of those came out of a place of war and training for self-defense, right? It was a way to learn to be able to defend yourself. And I think that can actually be more merciful than not being trained in self-defense. Because someone who is trained in jiu-jitsu is going to be able to subdue a situation better than I would. I would have to use more lethal violence in certain situations to subdue it, to come out with a hand on the situation versus some people that are trained in martial arts and different things. And so I think there's even some mercy in being able to be trained in self-defense. And so
I've actually never thought of it that way. That's actually good.
And so, and then, something we have, so Remy, our middle child right now, is a little ball of energy that more than we would like comes out in anger. And so something that we've recognized is that some of these martial arts, because they deal with self-defense, they also deal with self-control. And learning to handle anger has been shown can be given through learning some of these disciplines. And so that's something that we've considered. We've considered putting Remy in jiu-jitsu so he can learn some self-control skills and use them in a more positive sense.
Very cool.
Other than just raging out on his sister and punching people. And so I think there is some goodness that can come out of these. Now, what I want people to chew on and to think about, because the other thing that I wrestle with this question is, will things like boxing and martial arts and things of that sense, will they exist in a new earth that's been redeemed from the sin that we face?
Ooh, that's a good question too.
Because how does that? Because my assumption would be no. So how does that impact how we should be living right now?
Yeah.
And so now, again, in this question, wanted to focus on the violence and whether or not it's right for us, in a controlled setting with referees, with regulations,
Yep.
is it okay for us to punch each other in the face a couple times? And I think there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, sure.
I think more of an issue is the people who, well, number one, are you doing this so I can hurt other people? Because that's an issue. If I'm just doing this sport because I can hurt other people, that's an issue. And that's not just boxing. If you're playing football because you want to hurt people, that's an issue that needs to get checked out.
Sure.
And then the people watching. Do I watch this because I want to see people get hurt? I think that's a cultural thing that we should observe and maybe look, be careful with. And a lot of this, right, like stems from, all the way back to the Romans and the Colosseum.
Sure.
And today we would look back at gladiators and them killing people and all of that as horrendous, and say, those people, not only the people participating, are they in the wrong for killing? It's not justified killing in that sense. But the people watching who promoted this and made this popular by enjoying watching this violence created part of the issue with this. And so do we have an issue as a culture in wanting to see violence? Or is it we watch because we enjoy seeing people who are technically skilled in something? There's a difference there, and we need to examine ourselves in that. And then you have just the other issues with sports that you could talk about: gambling, boxing. You always have objectification of women with the ring girls, and
Sure.
There's lots of different things. But in the regard of regulated violence, in the sense of we have, I think learning skills for self-defense is okay.
Sanctions and rules, or sanctioned matches with rules
Yeah.
that are designed to try and keep people as safe as possible
Yeah,
while trying
yeah,
to
yeah.
engage in this activity.
Yes. I think there's some gray there. But I think there's nothing wrong with learning self-defense skills. I think there's nothing wrong with enjoying watching someone who has skilled themselves in something and are participating in a as safe as possible scenario. And but I do think, if it's not going to exist on the other side of the return of Christ, what does that mean for how we should be living now? And I think that's something to wrestle with and think about. So
That's so good. Any last minute comments, anything like that before we close out?
no, the questions have been so great. Keep them coming.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, it's one of the highlights of my week, actually, to be able
Yeah.
to do this on a Monday and be able to record these questions and
Yeah.
just really dive into, because the Bible is a living, breathing word.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is alive, and
Yes.
just to see it applied to all these different scenarios and to really just dive deep in it, it's been awesome. And it just happened just like that. We're episode 5.
I know.
Let's
Yep.
run another 5. And thank you guys for taking the time to join us today. If you have any questions, we're going to put the phone number that you can text anonymously to in the description below. We are now on YouTube Podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify and
Amazon Music. Yeah.
Music.
Most all places you can find a podcast.
Yeah.
We're there.
And so if you have any questions, like I said, we're going to put the phone number to text in the description below. And as always, we appreciate your questions, and we will see you in the next episode of the Pew Review. Have a good rest of your week.